Chances are you never heard of these coasters. In today's video, we are exploring every corner of the planet to find some of the weirdest and craziest coasters in the world that no one has heard of. If you are a crazy coaster enthusiast, admittedly, you probably know some of these rides, but if I can open your eyes to just one new contraption, then this video is an absolute win. We are going in no order whatsoever, and I will just be rapid firing whatever on my mind, so in total we will cover 10 coasters, and with that out of the way, let's dive into the world of unheard of coasters. To start off the video, we're going to talk about Deep Space Atamagica. Now this is like a level 2 rarity coaster. There's probably a lot of you that know of this coaster, especially because it's at the only good park in India. It is located right next to Hot Wheels Nitro, the B&M Floorless, and there's actually good footage of this coaster. That might be a common trend for this video, the lack of footage, but I'm sure Flashing will do a great job at supplying all of you with something to look at, especially when we are discussing these super rare coasters. Anyways, Deep Space Atamagica looks to be the Space Mountain of India. It's an interesting premiere launch coaster. There's a crazy dark ride pre-segment with tons of strobing lights and fog, and looks like a sick hype up to a relatively subpar coaster. Following this, you launch straight into the layout and the preceding show building, and I think this coaster would benefit from being in the pitch black, but there are spotlights that light up the whole track. Like, at that point, what is the point of even building a massive show building to put the coaster indoors? I'm just saying, you're taking away the novelty of the dark, and it's a huge missed opportunity. The layout itself is very short with only 2 inversions, a top speed of 44 miles per hour and a max height of 52 feet, which is actually pretty typical for an indoor coaster. This is definitely a weird Premier Rides launch coaster that a surprising amount of people don't know about. The next ride is significantly more rare, and this is Ramsey's at Parque de Atracciones, Zaragoza. Essentially, this is a glorified butterfly coaster. It is hard to even call a butterfly a coaster. You just kind of sit in a bathtub and rock back and forth. I have no idea why RCDB counts it as one, but you know what? I'll take the free credits where I can get them. Anyways, Ramsey's is exactly like a butterfly, but it's significantly more upscaled. This coaster is made by a company called Safeco, and they have made a whopping total of 1 roller coaster, so this is their sole work. This coaster spent a bit of time at Parque de Atracciones Montjuic before being relocated to Zaragoza. At this park, it had some theming installed. An Egyptian-like temple was built around the U-shaped track, there were 2 massive statues installed, the track was repainted, and the trains were given a makeover. The only other detail that you really need to know is that there are 2 tracks and 2 trains, and it just goes back and forth. Yep, that's pretty much it. Back and forth, like a butterfly, except this time with good theming. I bet you haven't heard of this one. Up next is Cobra. This is another shuttle coaster, and it is super interesting. This is part of the larger Cobra model by PAX, and if your mind is jumping to Cobra at Coneyland, it's not that. But you did get the right company. Cobra at Coneyland took what this original model lacked in and improved upon it, so we are specifically talking about the less refined version. Now, the reason why this model is so obscure to most enthusiasts are all the installations were built in Russia and the Middle East, so not a lot of people have been able to ride them. There's also not a single one of them operating anymore, but that's besides the point. This coaster uses single rail technology and a shuttle system to provide forces and follows a Schwarzkopf shuttle loop layout. The thing that I find really interesting is at its peaks, the single rail track just dissolves into the tail and the head of a snake. It's such a bizarre sight to see. The last comment are the trains are a bit goofy with huge bulky restraints, but overall it's a lesser heard of model that looks extremely quirky. Next up is the one and only Orphan Rocker. I'm still trying to get over the bizarreness of the name because, like, what did I just read? Orphan Rocker? Who decides to name a coaster than that? It's supposed to be based off the rocking aspect and a view of Orphan Rock, but I still think it's a weird choice. Anyways, enough about the name. This coaster has a super deep history that can probably be turned into a video on its own. It's actually been under construction for close to 30 years. It went vertical in 1988, and an advertising campaign was launched to build interest in ridership. Upon testing, many problems were found with the ride system and the coaster's opening was delayed. In the following 20 years, certain parts were slowly replaced to try and get it to work, but nothing seemed to solve the issue, and only in 2017 did they start dismantling the coaster and giving up the dream of rocking orphans. This coaster was super unique though. It had rocking trains and a super unique layout and a rainforest. In fact, one turn of this coaster was built along a 700-foot cliff, which is absolutely mind-blowing to me. That and a 3-minute and 20-second ride duration has me convinced that this would have been a decently solid coaster. It definitely would be a top-tier terrain coaster if it did manage to open, but unfortunately it never came to be and it is rotting away half-built under the brutal Australian sun right now. Next up is my personal favorite obscure coaster, and that is Atlantis Adventure. This is the one and only Intamin Aquatrax, and if you watched the Intamin models ranked video, I had a lot of positive things to say about this coaster. Imagine you take an Intamin Blitz and combine it with a water coaster. That is essentially what Atlantis Adventure is. Doesn't that sound amazing? Well, it does, because it is amazing. Not only is this a near perfect water coaster model, but Lotte World themed it really well with a castle and rock work, so this is a top tier ride that you are talking about. If you look at the statistics alone, you have an LSM lift hill and the forces max out at 3.8 Gs. It's definitely a hell of a punch, and I've even heard that there's some airtime mixed in. Even if there is none, the load of the water turns and I-305 like S-bends are enough to call it good for me. But why is this so obscure if it is one of the most visited parks in the world? Well, Korea is a lesser visited country for coasters compared to Europe, the US, and Japan. Korea is an amazing country, but their coasters don't get talked about too much, and I am hoping to change that this upcoming summer. Before we get into the next segment, here's a quick reminder to join the Discord, link in the description. I love talking to all of you guys there, and we do daily questions and trivia. It's a lot of fun, so I look forward to seeing you all there, link in the description. Next up is Starflyer. This is the sole Pinfari invert that is still operating in the world, and it looks to be a hell of a ride. And this is still a Pinfari traveling coaster we were talking about, so it does look hella janky, but that doesn't not mean it's a bad coaster. In this layout, it has not one, but 2 inversions and pulls 4 Gs. It definitely looks like a super interesting ride, but it's not well ridden because it's located in the Philippines. It's also been SBNO for the past 3 years, but it is operating this year, and all the other coasters of this model are defunct, so it's definitely a remaining novelty that won't get any more additions in the future. One of the most prominent manufacturers in the world is Bolliger and Mapplard, and since every single one of their editions are high quality and expensive, you rarely see any B&Ms fly under the radar. Now this coaster is probably the most unknown B&M out there. If you're talking about coasters purely made by B&M from start to finish, not just using their track, because there's more of those obscure coasters, but we could say that for a part 2, this is probably the most unknown B&M in the world, and that is Dragon's Run. Now this was originally in the USA at Hard Rock Cafe for a whopping 2 years. It operated under the Elias Led Zeppelin The Ride, and then Time Machine, but the story of Hard Rock Cafe can also be saved for another video. Upon closure, a park in Vietnam picked it up to be relocated, and now it operates today as Dragon Runs at Dragon Park. This is honestly one of my favorite color palettes on any coaster to date. I love the deep shades of blue with the white track. The color just meshes so well together. I can't talk much about the ride experience, but it has 6 inversions, and it's a B&M, so what can go wrong? This is still a huge coaster, especially because it was in the US for a short period of time, but everyone kind of thought it just disappeared, when in reality it's living out its operating life overseas. The next coaster we are going to talk about is also from a very prominent manufacturer, and that is Storm at Etnaland. This is already from a very obscure model, the Mack Mega Coaster. A lot of people kind of forget this exists because it's just an inferior version of the Intamin Megalites and never really sold well, but it definitely is a thing. This model is most famous for Alpina Blitz at Nigloland, and people just kind of forget about Storm because it's a lower profile park in Italy. Now Storm is literally the same coaster as Alpina Blitz, but it has a Heartline roll at the end of the ride, so it's definitely a solid ride and has a slight edge over its counterpart, but it does get very little attention for how big of a coaster it is. Next up is Valancha, and this is a really interesting Intamin multi-inversion coaster that's in Guatemala. This is the copy and paste 8 inversion clone, which now I realize all its counterparts are also rare coasters. The biggest one is Flight of the Phoenix, which is now defunct, and the other is just sitting in storage in Brazil. So yeah, I guess there's not a lot to compare it to. Anyways, this is still similar to all of the other Intamin multi-inversion coasters and actually has some light theming. It has some snow theming, which makes sense given the name, and there are a ton of rocks around the coaster and the station. This is something I wish SeaWorld would do, especially with something as fitting as Emperor, but whatever, SeaWorld is cheap and this park obviously is not. The last coaster that we are talking about in this video is Racing Coaster. This is actually a Premier Rides launch shuttle coaster, so another high profile manufacturer that flew under the radar. This is kind of like a modern version of Mr. Freeze in the trailer with its inverted top hat and the whole shuttle coaster aspect, and it's definitely an interesting addition. The theming is strange to say the least with a massive gorilla on the outside of the building, but it's quirky and that's fine by me. One thing about this coaster is I love the support structure. I love how there's a truss that the supports of the track sit on, and it looks like 2 completely separate things, and the color palette with the different shades of black just capture my attention. I don't know why. Anyways, this is in Indonesia if any of you guys plan on riding it. So those are 10 obscure coasters that I hope you haven't heard of before. I'm really curious if I introduce you to any new coasters, so comment down below if I did. Also, there are plenty of more coasters to talk about, so if you guys want to see a part 2 sometime, let me know in the comments. That's all for today's video, guys. As always, make sure to like and subscribe, join the Discord link in the description. I'll see you in the next one. Have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.